Let's dive right in. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're cutting through all that loud, blustery diplomatic rhetoric to get to the real, unyielding structural realities behind the massive standoff over the Strait of Hormuz. We've all seen the dramatic headlines, right? But the underlying architecture of this crisis, the actual nuts and bolts of why this is happening, that's what we really need to unpack.
72. Yep, for 72 tense days, negotiations have been, well, entirely paralyzed. Ever since the Islamabad talks completely broke down back on April 12th. The gap between the two sides, it hasn't meaningfully narrowed at all, not even a little bit.
And the real-world fallout from all this waiting? Try 1,600 ships. Picture this. While the diplomats bicker back and forth, submitting proposals and shooting down counter-proposals, a staggering 1,600 ships are currently just sitting there, completely idle in a massive geopolitical traffic jam right inside the strait, literally just waiting for the politicians to figure this out.
Section 1. The 72-day stalemate.
So, to understand why these Pakistani diplomatic shuttles and endless counter-proposals keep face-planting at the exact same hurdle, we have to look way past the surface-level noise of the daily news cycle. It is so easy to get distracted by the political theater. Take President Trump, for example. He dismissed Tehran's counter-proposal as, quote, totally unacceptable, playing games. But honestly, while it's tempting to just assume bad faith from any side, viewing this purely as a game of political chicken totally misses the true structural nature of the crisis. Actually, scratch that. They are talking, and they do want a deal, but they're stuck on something incredibly fundamental.
Section 2. The Hormuz Sovereignty Clash.
The uncompromising, absolutely crucial issue at the heart of this entire stalemate is the foundational concept of who actually owns the waterway. We aren't just talking about a temporary hall pass here, we're talking permanent ownership. Sovereignty isn't just some fancy legal buzzword, it is the ultimate statement of foundational principle and supreme authority over a territory. Iran's counterproposal demands outright recognition of its sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. And listen, this is a position its leadership literally cannot just quietly walk away from. If they were to back down on this, they'd risk completely destroying the political legitimacy of their entire leadership narrative back home.
So we're looking at a completely unbridgeable gap. It's like two different rule books. On one side, you have international law, specifically UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Now, UNCLOS explicitly guarantees all nations the right of free transit passage through international straits. That means ships can pass through without asking for permission or paying a toll. But on the other side, you have Iran's perspective. For decades now, Iran has viewed the strait as running straight through its own territorial waters and continental shelf. Since their coastline makes up the northern shore of the strait's absolute narrowest point, they consider themselves the co-sovereigns of the waterway. They're demanding the world recognize an authority that, while international law simply does not.
Section 3.
Why neither side can move. Let's break down the massive, immovable stakes here, because this explains exactly why neither Washington nor Tehran can afford to give even an inch on this point. 20%. Think about that for a second. That is the massive chunk of the entire global oil supply flowing right through Hormuz. This is exactly where it hits home for you and me. Handing over a veto over 20% of the world's oil, that guarantees instant global economic shocks, skyrocketing inflation, and absolute chaos at your local gas pump. For America, if they were to accept Iranian sovereignty, it would effectively hand Iran that permanent veto power. Any future dispute, whether it's about nuclear capabilities, regional influence, you name it, Iran could just resolve it by threatening to close the strait. Recognizing their sovereignty doesn't solve the U.S.'s problem. It permanently bakes Iranian leverage into the global economy forever. No way America willingly agrees to that.
But conversely, let's look at Iran's absolute bottom line. The hardliners within the IRGC, who hold a huge amount of de facto power in Tehran, they absolutely cannot yield. Why? Because controlling Hormuz is their one and only asymmetric weapon. It's the ace up their sleeve that makes them relevant and honestly formidable against much larger, stronger global adversaries. In their minds, dropping the sovereignty claim isn't just a diplomatic concession, it's a complete surrender of the only real leverage they have left on the global stage.
Section 4. The reparations red herring.
Now, you might have heard a lot of chatter about Tehran demanding financial compensation after 72 days of American and Israeli strikes. It's definitely dominating a lot of the conversation right now. But diplomatically speaking, it's just a distraction, a total red herring. Financially, this is actually a very solvable problem. Sure, the U.S. Congress would never, ever approve anything formally labeled as war reparations. America hasn't paid those to a country it attacked in modern history. But you know how politics works? The funds can simply be repackaged. We're talking about things like sanctions relief, releasing frozen assets, or maybe setting up new investment frameworks. At the end of the day, all of these are just financial transfers that conveniently avoid the politically toxic label of reparations. It's tricky, for sure, but creative diplomacy can absolutely solve the money issue.
But here is the stark contrast. Sovereignty cannot be repackaged. Unlike money, supreme territorial authority over a critical global choke point is absolute. It's binary. It is either explicitly recognized or it isn't. You can't creatively account your way out of who owns the water, and that is exactly why neither side can budge on it.
Section 5. The power of ambiguity.
So, if the core incompatibility of sovereignty literally cannot be solved directly, what do? Well, diplomats are quietly floating a really counterintuitive strategy to break this 72-day deadlock. Just don't resolve the legal question at all. Defer it. Kick the can down the road. The goal here is to build a ceasefire framework that relies on de facto navigational arrangements. In plain English, that means giving Iran just enough operational authority to satisfy its domestic political needs back home, while simultaneously granting America enough functional access to satisfy its strategic requirements. It's a classic workaround. Both sides get to go home and claim their core position was respected, while the actual, thorny legal question of who owns the strait is just left deliberately unresolved.
International law scholars might pull their hair out over this kind of unresolved, messy settlement, but the truth is, deliberate ambiguity is a historically proven diplomatic tool when structural incompatibilities just cannot be bridged. It's exactly how unbridgeable conflicts have been managed for decades. Think about it. It's how the Kashmir conflict has been handled since 1947. It's how Cyprus was managed in 1974. It is the exact legal limbo that Taiwan exists in right this very second. And frankly, it's how the practical, day-to-day status quo of the Strait of Hormuz has been managed for the last 40 years anyway.
Which brings us to our final, pivotal question. Will domestic hardliners and American hawks actually accept an outcome that neither side can definitively call a victory? As we wrap up this explainer, that is the ultimate test. Can President Trump and the Iranian leadership sell this deliberately ambiguous, kind of messy arrangement to their own domestic audiences? The talks continue, the proposals keep flying back and forth, and the gap remains. And while the politicians try to figure out if they can stomach a deferred resolution, those 1,600 ships, they just continue to wait. I really hope this gave you a clearer picture of the massive structural forces at play here. Think about that final question, and thanks for joining me to explore the realities behind the headlines.